thank you so much for chatting with me today about your work in Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I love the movie, and congrats on the Oscar nomination. It's got to feel good. Your second time around getting Oscar
Yeah,
nominated. How's it feel this time around?
it's not my first rodeo, it's my second. Thanks though, and obviously we're super stoked about the nominations, and looking forward to the circus that's
Yeah,
about to befall us all. So, yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Well, it's so well deserved. Glad to see it happen. And of course, you first made the Oscar shortlist back in December,
Hmm.
but sadly the Bake Off was canceled. Had you guys already worked out what you were going to present at the Bake Off?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, just the part of that essentially just the because of the process, you need to have your reel already prepared, uh, so that it's all ready to go. And so for that reason, I think because they're now putting those reels on the Academy screening room for members to watch, should there be a nomination, it was actually pretty fortuitous that they could essentially pivot that quickly and just
Hmm.
say we're going to do this in that format. And so I guess for that reason, yeah, it was pretty handy.
Hmm. That's good. Yeah, it's great that voters can still see the work that you've presented there. Was there something that you were especially excited though to showcase in the Bake Off environment?
Oh, I mean, the thing that's fantastic about the bake-offs, first of all, I mean, let's not forget the fact that this is like the one time a year when so many of us can come together and be in one space. I mean, it's a place to see people you haven't seen in years and catch up, and the social aspect of it. But of course, it's also a place to see the work presented in just like the most spectacular presentation you could ask for. And so as soon as we hear that it was shifting to Zoom, they're like, oh, people are watching this on laptop screens now. But it's better that than it not happening at all, right? And so yeah, but I mean, I think that's the aspect of it. I think wanting to just showcase the spectacle of Kingdom on a huge screen with the full sound system blaring and everything else. I guess that was kind of the uh, the thing I was really looking forward to is just things like the flood and things like the river sequence. Just these heavy sort of action sequences that also have this emotional punch to them as well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, let's dive into the work for sure. You
Sure.
you worked on the last three Apes films as well, and the last film was 7 years ago. How fast do your tools evolve? How much did the visual effects evolve from War for the Planet of the Apes when you came on to Kingdom?
The biggest jump, I think, for this one was the fact that all of our simulation framework had gotten a big sort of upgrade, I think, through the process of previous very large films that had a lot of simulation requirements to them. So things that were quite a challenge. We had a couple of shots, for example, in War for the Planet of the Apes after Caesar goes off the waterfall and he's in the river, and those shots were quite tricky to pull off. And I think coming into this one, we had the benefit of a lot of R&D that had gone into simulation systems that allowed us to do things like couple hair simulation and water simulation together in a way that we sort of weren't able to do previously. That was a huge boon for this, especially on the page. It was clear that we were going to have a lot of wet apes in the film. So that I guess I mean, but I guess generally speaking, the everything about the pipeline is continually on the move. I mean, to the point where even through the previous films, going from the first to the second to the third Apes film, all of the characters would need to get some kind of an upgrade because we had changed the shading framework or something about the rendering or the muscle and tissue simulations. And so all of those things apply, especially fast forward 7 years. The way we're doing muscle simulation and things it has is subtly changed from the way it was doing. So everything is constantly on the move with visual effects.
Sure. Yeah, and in addition to all the water and hair mixing together in this film, another huge difference between this film and the previous ones is how many more talking apes you have this time around. Far
Yep.
more talking apes. I've heard you talk before. I'd love to hear more about the deep learning solver and how that helped refine sort of the puppet matching towards the human performances. Yeah, tell me more about how you utilize that tool and how it helped bring a new level of authenticity.
Yeah, so the obviously we had talking apes in the previous films as well, but it's just this time everybody is talking as their primary form of communication, and there's a lot of dialogue in the film, and so that the fact that we also had to make a dozen new characters for this one um, was pretty much the impetus for trying to figure out which way we wanted to go with the facial solution because the previous films we're using facial capture the way we have been on the previous movies except now we're with this time around we were using a pair of cameras for their face rigs which gave us the ability to actually create a three-dimensional mesh of the actor's face 48 times a second which certainly gives us a much clearer picture of all the subtle nuance of what things like lips and the jaw and things are doing. Um, but I guess the big thing here was that in the previous installments, facial animators were matching that facial performance reference, kind of keyframing it by hand, using that as reference. And that's obviously a time-consuming process. And obviously, we have some amazingly skilled facial animators who can like really get through a lot of work quickly. But this was just a whole new level of amount of facial animation to get through. So what the essentially the facial deep learning solver, like it says in the name, is utilizing a machine learning process where we can essentially train essentially a system on what the dots on the actor's face are doing, and it learns that the correlation between when the actor's face does this, the ape's face needs to do that, because that's always part of these films is it's never a one-to-one mapping because the actors are playing somebody that has a very different face than they do, especially with things like apes. The slightest jaw movement, let's say, on an actor may translate to something slightly comical or slightly unsettling if you were to directly apply that to an ape. So there's always this translation layer that comes in the process. And what this effectively does is it was the first pass, essentially. The facial deep learning solver took that facial performance and essentially produced a baseline facial animation performance that the facial animators could then pick up. And the thing that was fantastic there is that first of all, it it really gave us a consistent performance because what we typically would see in the past is let's say we have a dozen different facial animators. They're all potentially making slightly different choices about what they're seeing on the actor's face versus what the ape's doing. And that can often result in needing to carefully keep an eye on keeping the character on model, so to speak, so that they don't feel that their face doesn't move differently from shot to shot to shot. And so the deep learning solver essentially handles that part of it. So everybody's working from a consistent baseline of what sliders are moving what parts of the face in specific combinations. And then the other part of that is it also again then gives the facial animators the nuts and bolts pass of the facial performance is already there. And so it really allows them to spend all of their time on really focusing in on the nuance of looking at what the actor, well, what were we getting from Owen in this particular moment, and am I getting the same emotional hit from Noah at the same time? And if not, why not? And then those are the conversations we can spend all of our animation dailies time talking about instead of I think the technical nuts and bolts of the performance. So that's the big boon on this one around.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and it works so well. I was very curious about how different animators tackling different facial expressions would come through. So that's really fascinating. I've also heard Wes talking about really collaborating with all departments and wanting visual effects involved really early on. What was it like working with Wes? I know he's talked about he's made, of course, big budget, visual effects heavy films before, but I know he's talked about this was kind of jumping into a whole new level of effects with all these, animated characters, essentially. What was like working with Wes, bringing him into this world, especially a world that you've been working on for all these
Yeah.
years?
It was a fantastic time. I mean, Wes is he's one of us, so to speak. I mean, in the fact that he kind of had a toe in visual effects. At one point in time, that was a path he was heading down for a period of his career. And so the fact that he's produced. The he got the Maze Runner films off the back of a short film that he animated himself, and so there's certainly a depth of knowledge of the process coming into it. And so it made communication between him and us during reviews, or him and I, he and I during the shoot even, or during prep. There was that common ground where we wouldn't have to get into the specifics of what I mean when I say this. I mean, there was a shorthand that made every conversation or every decision a lot easier, I guess. And so that plus the fact that this is his. I think he's sort of said three and a half films now working with WETA Effects, and so there's also that knowledge of our process and our team and that kind of thing as well, and this beautiful trust in the process, because I know Wes has mentioned numbers of times that going into a process like this, it can be a very terrifying thing for a director because the visual effects process does take a long time. And so he turns over something, and it may not be until months later when he finally sees the completed sequence and can really gauge, did this work? Did we make the right choices? Do we need to lengthen this shot or trim this shot, or all those kind of things. And so the fact that there was that trust there from the get-go makes a lot of the process, hopefully eases anxiety for him as the director, and it also makes our review sessions just flow a lot more smoothly as well. But it was a joy. I mean, Wes is amazing, and the fact that especially in this climate where it's very fashionable to pretend that you didn't use visual effects in your movie, the fact that he's gone completely the opposite direction and is shouting from the rooftops, "I love my visual effects team," and look at the great work that they did is huge for us. It just, I think everybody working on the film, we all sense that there's something special happening here. And the fact that we were all so tightly involved in the creative process, I think this has been easily the most creatively satisfying film that I've worked on to date from just the whole experience. So it's been wonderful.
That's awesome. And I think it shows in the work as well that what I love about the Apes films is there's no shying away from. There's a ton of visual effects in these films. Obviously, you can't get away from that. But it finds a beautiful blend of real environments a lot of the time, and shooting as much as you can on location,
Mhm.
and amplifying it with these incredible characters and incredible effects. Tell me about the relationship between your team and the physical special effects team, and how you found what's in your camp, what's in theirs, and who needs to do what.
Yeah, that was I think the other thing, obviously it was fantastic working with Wes, but it was also such a really healthy collaborative process working with all of the other HODs in prep and then through the shoot as well. And I think one of the things that really helped is early on in prep, because I was coming into this with the benefit of already having done three of these before, and we have a specific process that was going to be very foreign to a lot of the crew. It allowed me the opportunity to sort of throw together a video of like, here's an hour of me sort of going through examples from the previous three movies of like what we shot and what was the final result and why we did it the way we did it, and if we were to do it again, this is the way we'd do it, next time. And so it gave. I sent that to Wes. He put it up on his private Vimeo page and sent it out to everybody. The cast saw it, all the sort of, the crew were able to see it as well. And so before we ever started, shooting a first frame of the film, everybody kind of got what the process was. And it really, really helped, I guess, grease the wheels, so to speak, in that if I was saying we need to do it this way, there was an understanding of why I was asking for this slightly bizarre way of shooting the shot, for example. But all of that to say that, when it came to the collaboration with special effects, it also kind of was there for Rodney Burke and his team, of how we were going to be accomplishing these things. And it came down to things like the river is the biggest example that's probably obvious in the movie of we have a scene where we have our human actor and Freya playing May, and we have Raka, who eventually goes in the river, being in the same frame together. But there's no way that was going to be a dry for wet scenario. Like we needed all of that both for their performances and for also just the final picture you see in the movie, for there to be peril and there to be a sense of, well, you could literally just see the water, almost drowning, May for a period of time and all that stuff. So there was these conversations about how much do we need to build? We were always going to be expanding or extending the river rapid, to just make the scope fill out the entire environment. and how big of a footprint did special effects need to make? Their water tank, how much water current did we need to do? All those kind of conversations, so that we in post would be able to make those decisions of from shot to shot. For this one, we're going to be keeping all the water from camera to beyond Freya, and then we'll extend beyond that. Or this shot will be almost entirely in camera. That shot will be completely replaced, just so that we could leverage the best kind of visual result. Between when our characters are making their way along a seaside, sort of pounding waves, scenario along cliffs, that they could provide the foreground water splashes to interact with our human cast member, and that we could have all of that beautiful reference, so that when we had to tie in our digital splashes and all the sort of rough sea out beyond, that it was all there and it would all feel like a cohesive sort of a blend. In the village attack sequence, obviously the whole place is set ablaze, but we didn't want to go into that saying, well, don't worry, you guys, we'll handle this all in post, because there's something, obviously, the more real anything we can put in the frame, the better the result's going to be. And that was kind of the mantra through the whole deal. It's like, if there's a possibility to shoot something for real, even if we all acknowledge that we're going to replace most, if not all of it, in some cases, at least we've got something there that we can all look at together and say, oh, that's why, as we're working up the visual effects, we can point to the real thing and say, oh, that's the thing we're missing. The particular way the lights, or the wind's blowing in the trees, the way the focus is falling off, or all those kind of things. Just having that visceral, real thing in frame just anchors the work, and it all gives us all something that we can look at together.
Absolutely. I was curious about the biggest challenge for you on the film. You referenced the bridge sequence extensively there, and to my untrained eye, obviously the water filling up the silo at the end is maybe the bigger set piece, but
Hmm.
that bridge sequence seemed maybe more complex to me from a visual level because of the way you have Raka in the water and all of those characters. Curious from your perspective, what was the biggest challenge on this film?
I mean, generally speaking, the biggest challenge was selling the wet apes, and
Yeah.
because you've got and that obviously comes into play to the fore in the river at the end of the second act, and then obviously it comes back to us again in the flood. The difference between those two is that the river sequence does have that live action component to it, where we actually had the physical set, the physical water all interacting with our digital stuff. By the time we get to the third act flood, we no longer have humans in the mix anymore in the story. And so because of that, and because of the fact that we never really found a location through the location scouting process, there wasn't really a space that was like, this is our silo. Um, it- you know, that coupled with the fact that there was going to be such a volume of water that had to go in there, there wasn't really going to be an opportunity for special effects to do their thing, because we would have been looking at a full day to reset the water tanks and everything else, to do one more take. Um, and the fact that all of our performers have a different silhouette than the character they're performing, any water interaction that we had wouldn't have really been usable anyway. So for all of those reasons, it was like, well, the obvious thing we need to do here is that most of that flood sequence is going to be entirely digital, and that's um, I think part of the like 33 minutes of the movie that are entirely digital throughout the film, for logistical reasons. We didn't have a location, or even if we could find it, it was going to be too logistically or financially infeasible to try and shoot anything practical. But to, I guess, to get back the question, like, yeah, the wet apes was the probably the biggest thing across the film, that was the challenge there, because of how complex that what we're needing to do is. Because typically there's a process where the effects artists would generate the actual water simulation in a low res form, that would hand off to the animation team, and they would, they could at least see the reference of where the surface is. They could place all of their apes in that, and that, whether that was coming from keyframe animation or whether that was coming from mocap performances of actors being pushed around in office chairs on a mocap stage, getting carried away by the flood. The animators would do their thing. That would go through our standard process through our creatures department, who handles all of the body simulations of the muscles and the skin and the hair. That hair simulation could use the flow fields from the water simulation to dictate what happens to the hair in the water current. But then once the hair was done, that had to go back to the effects department again so that they could then re-simulate the water or essentially, turn the settings up on the water simulation to generate a really high resolution version of that. And also deal with taking the hair that was already moving from the water before, apply really, really high res water sims to it so that we got all the rivulets of water dripping down the faces and draining out of the hair in a realistic way to pass back to then go back into lighting and compositing and everything else to finish off the picture. But there's such a huge amount of communication and collaboration between multiple departments is through that whole process that it's very easy to get tripped up. And like one example, I guess, is that the key moment in that river scene with Rocca's final words in the movie when he tells them together strong when he gets swept away. Initially, the way we had shot that, he was going to say something else, and Wes realized through the course of it that it didn't have the punch that it needed. And so, while we were already in process and in progress with this animation, he's like, "I'm really sorry, guys. We've got to change his dialogue here." Okay, well, we'll have to do a new facial capture thing. And then through the processing, later in the process, we're getting very close to the end of the show. He's like, "I'm really sorry. We got to do it again." And so he changed the facial animation performance, and all it's like we go, "Oh my God, we got to redo this and this and this." But I mean, the film is a much stronger. It's such a key moment for the movie. Of course, we all go, well, that's whatever has to be done to make the movie as good as it can be is what we're going to do. So, but yeah, there's just a lot of those sort of moments along the way that make it a hugely complex thing to undertake. Yeah.
And the work pays off. Like I said, I mean, the way the performances come through, the way that these apes feel truly real and believable is so impressive. Well, Eric, I have a very dumb question to ask you, so I apologize in advance for a very dumb question. Three of the five nominees for Best Visual Effects this year feature extensive monkey or ape characters. What is it about apes or monkeys that make for great visual effects? Why is this the thing that we've nailed over these years?
I don't know the number of digital simian characters that we at WETA have done since 2005 is kind of mind-boggling. I mean, obviously I think there's just inherently something about uh they're our closest cousins, genetically. We share 98% of our DNA, all that stuff. And there's something. I mean, if you've ever gone to the zoo, if you've ever gone and just sat there and watched, an orangutan or gorillas with like the moment you lock eyes, there is instantly this like, whoa, we're related somehow, I think. And so because of that, it's an interesting stories that can be told with these characters that are human-like but not human. And I don't know, there's just something about that, I guess.
So good. Appreciate it. Well, Eric, your work on this is incredible. You've been in the business a while now. You've worked on a ton of incredible projects, and I'm sure every single project you work on, you're learning, you're finding new ways to do things. Is there one film that you look back on in your career as maybe your biggest learning curve or the biggest education that you have that you look back and like that was a pivotal moment in your career?
I mean, the first one that jumps to mind, I guess, is way back in 2006. Had worked on a film called The Water Horse, and that was the first time that I got the opportunity to actually go on set and be part of the filmmaking process. And I think that was certainly a pivotal moment in the sense of it was on one hand, you know, something that I'd been hoping to get to do for years and years and years. I mean, obviously, uh, computer graphics and photography were those are the two things that really had kind of spurred me on and got me into this thing. But there was always that magic of making movies and blah blah blah. But to finally be able to be part of that process and actually really experience both sides of the visual effects thing was huge. And obviously, ever since then, it's been if I'm on a show, I do want to be part of that shooting process because obviously it's an enjoyable thing and it's fun to be part of that circus, but it's also so beneficial and critical for the kind of work that we do that if there's nobody there from visual effects to say, oh, if we just made this little tweak in the way we're shooting this, the end result is going to be so much stronger for it. Or just to be there, to be part of the conversation when these things are being decided. The post process can just go so much more smoothly and produce something that was would have been, far less effective, otherwise.
That's awesome. Well, Erik, obviously the work over these years has paid off. I love your work, and I love Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. So congrats again on the Oscar nomination, and I'm excited to see what happens.
So are we. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thanks, Erik. Appreciate it.